everybody for coming out on this lovely morning. We will definitely take the weather, the warmth, and I drove up from North Carolina yesterday, and we hit that storm of rain right at my favorite place, between Fredericksburg and Quantico, where but,
traffic goes to die, right?
well, it's great to see everybody. I know Nicole's going to be joining us. Is she on?
I am. I'm here.
Can everybody hear?
Yes. Sorry if I scared y'all. I'm here though.
You're calling from what location?
I am in Springfield, Franconia District.
Great. May I, so that we can operate, may I have a motion that we can hear Nicole? Can everyone hear Nicole? Yeah. All in favor? Sorry, Regina. I wish your dad I couldn't find your note, but essentially, I think we're good. There we go. As you can see, we have a little bit of work to do today. The exciting thing is there's just been a lot of work going on all the committees, and so we want to hear from everybody and take this and how we go into over the next year in our planning. But I do want to just note a couple of things that have happened and just ask for people's input. Just note the other night, the Planning Commission did approve the preservation recommendations, Affordable Housing Preservation recommendations. I did present a hack statement as we had agreed to at the full meeting. And Mary Payton submitted comments. I'm not sure if there may have been others that submitted comments online, but I think there were also some industry groups that or representatives, developers who said while it wasn't, Lynn Strobel was notable because she really complimented staff and talked about how far this has come as a tool that could be used, individually as we think of different opportunities. Some other Brian was there and, raised some great questions, some of the things that we talked about. And I did introduce some of the issues that we had talked about that were other things that are imperative for us to use this policy going forward. So I suspect, I asked Tom, but I suspect the devil's going to be in the details when it goes to the Board of Supervisors and their understanding how that policy can be used in individual cases. But
right, just a couple of comments. First, I think that the how we implement that how the administrative guidelines for it is going to be really important. I think that there is still a lot of misunderstanding about what it is. It's not that it is enshrining policy as an aspirational goal, and that's something that the Preservation Task Force is very clear about at the outset of its report out in recommending the plan amendment, among other things. So I think that there's more communication that needs to take place in that regard with our industry partners. And second, if I may, I just want to thank all of our advocates who were able to submit testimony, who were able to comment. It does, it makes a huge difference. It really does. And I think it gives our decision makers a lot of comfort to know that there's support for the steps that we're taking. So please, on our behalf, keep up the great work. Thank you.
So to that point, to that point, Navaja wrote a letter, and is it helpful to obviously do that again for the Board of Supervisors hearing? Is there other efforts you want us to take as AHAC members, or maybe not as AHAC members, to kind of continue those conversations or communication that you said that might be needed?
With respect to this specifically, yes, I think it would be very helpful for us to receive communication on this. On it, we do have development projects that are moving forward as well. And I would say that on everything that we have going, especially where there's a hearing, et cetera, is that is that it helps for them, it helps them to hear consistently from our advocacy.
Thank you.
So is that posted already on the board schedule thing?
The,
The items on the.
so yeah, the items for the 21st are posted and up, and in our public hearings for Tuesday, there's this really shady guy who has a project going forward on the parking lot at the government center.
With an
I've heard about that guy.
Then something or other, not to mention their shady part.
Some crazy stuff going on over there.
So yes, and kidding aside, yes, it's posted and available there.
And the other one.
Yeah,
that'll
the
be-
less shady version is Wesley's deal. They're also, I think.
Yeah.
Yes. First Christian.
That we were, I was sharing leadership. Fairfax had their housing day, and I will say, yesterday, Tom and panel along with others and folks from the Land Center came and spoke, and it was a really wonderful opportunity to see it in action and connect what we talk about in numbers and families, hearing how that all comes together. So we mentioned both projects at the end when my colleagues at Cornerstones closed it out in action. So we'll send out some notes. One of the things, Jill, we're trying to do is give you all more of a heads up, and I have some talk points from Wesley and for Nick just to share with people who may want to call in. And I will say this is the first time I ever used the phone in option, and but for the planning commission, it worked really well. So it's made it a lot easier.
I'll just note that even I could hear her very clearly.
So there's just been so much action.
Dissemination of the great input, not to make any more for anybody. Very easy way you can kind of cover all of that, and certainly important to focus it on the individual cases that are coming in. But I think it's also helpful to sort of build the complete picture of the advocacy. And so having it sort of in one place where we could refer to it, maybe a list of you might be.
You could work on that because it goes with your pipeline. The pipeline work will be about unit types, portability, size could be.
The other thing that, is you already have structure set up on the website, or I think all the board. These will be. Just list them under that. In order to do that, we need.
I will just, I'll note a couple things. Number one, I think that's really important for us to do, and have now a platform to do so. Currently we're without a public affairs director. So we're down, so Regina's having to do everything at the moment. So, but we are, expect to have that addressed very shortly.
So that
Larry's here.
Oh,
Well, the only thing I would add on top of that, we're all at different levels. And even using a new web location to get the information required to help us to our fellow AHAC members, let alone to others who could be influenced.
it's just the link and kind of teach people how to navigate. So, hey, Mary, welcome to because I just thank you and weighed in on the presentation. We're going more proactively at two. So I think this is really coming together with all the work. With that, just noting some items of information. Many of the nonprofits received a training today that's happening, an update with Carla Bruce on what is One Fairfax and sort of how to be engaged. So meetings, so we're not participating, but we'll get that information out. I want to thank those who really were able to participate in the deeply rooted presentation with Steve Cole. I'm not sure how many. I know I was with my Cornerstones board, but thoughts about. I thought it was very well done, and I know the conversation in my groups in the after conversation was very rich about how to use that.
It was
Any
good.
thoughts
It was,
from people?
it was really good. It was so helpful. We are actually having them come to our agency staff meeting. So we're gonna have it at the end of the month. So they're gonna come to the same, similar presentation. It supports our DEIJ efforts, and I think we'll bring them back to our board retreats in June. They'll come. Really good. Thank you.
The first, obviously really good, but I'm always shocked at how people aren't aware of this. I mean, at what point are you not aware of all the injustice in the history of what's happened? And which shows it's even more important that we continue to do it. Right? It's not like you can't just check and say we did it, we're done, and you did it one time. So I think it's really important to keep it out there. It's much like Carlo, but it's recurring. And so it's something it's in a sense of a living, it's something that needs to be available and reference for us.
To that end, is it online? I mean, if I wanted to forward it to somebody and say, hey, you really need to watch this.
They had talked about making the presentation available. And also there were some full like scripted questions. There's a facilitator's guide that I'm on my board last week and send it out. And he's probably done other presentations. And I think that goes, Joe, to your point about, even just speaking points when people come to the podium, it's rooted in the understand how it's rooted when Fairfax is a housing lead. Great way to. And Tom, if everybody heads up.
Yeah, just very briefly, we are really excited about the Housing Symposium coming up here in March. We've got a lot of great panels. We're going to be back in person here at George Mason. So I think everyone, there's a nice closure there, because I think the last in-person meeting all of us went to last time was the first Housing Symposium. So we're, there's going to be a lot of participation from board members this year. We have a lot of industry, very impactful panels. We're expecting to have keynote speeches from Dr. Schutz at the Brookings Institution, and also we're expecting to speak. So March 15th at Mason, my only advice is do not wear a toga.
Okay, okay, Tom. Okay, Tom, I was just about to dust off my old one.
Well done.
Membership. Gina, will you? Vacant slot.
Excited to announce that the Fairfax County has identified a representative. It's anticipated the board will make that compromise first, and Ibrahim Omesh is expected. Hopefully we'll be able to join us March 24th at our full AF meeting.
Bring our effort,
In addition, we're expecting the planning commission to identify a replacement for Julie Stranley. Basin District. So we expect that to happen sometime during this month. But stay tuned for that.
Well, how you doing? Can you hear us okay? Put her on the spot.
It's a little hard. Like, you see me leaning in, it's a little hard. If others could just speak up slightly, that'd be great.
Then we will speak up. I know you all have the agenda. Thank you. You have the agenda before you, so we're going to just get into it because we really had some great work. And I'm going to turn it over first to Joe Mandara to talk about the budget.
Thank you, and to start first, all the budget committee work, we've had a number of really good meetings sitting against last week, but also a lot of the heavy lifting was done by Regina and other HCP staff and pulling together the information this is still a work in progress, as I've been saying now for a number of meetings, but I think we're making progress in terms of pulling in the ideas that people are providing, and at each conversation, getting some new ideas to work through. So for example, one of the things, I guess, at the full AHAC meeting that we talked about was that we wanted to have in our sort of intro context setting, part of the conversation, some stories to help share sort of the personal impacts of the work that we're doing. And so we had done that, pulled in some of the stories that were in the annual report. At our last budget committee meeting, there was some discussion that we maybe wanted to go a little different direction, pull in other stories that we haven't heard yet, we haven't told yet. And so folks are working on sending those in so we can replace those here, and really focus on similar kinds of stories, but maybe a little bit different. So we're broadening sort of the perspective that folks are.
So we're gonna have some stories from the mobile home park folks, that are gonna do some videos.
Okay, perfect. Thank you very much. Another thing that we're still working on is we had some conversation about making sure that we were providing and follow on the document. On the top of page 3, rule 3, number 1, healthy and effective show increasing demand and need, and the graphic relative to that, but just demonstrating sort of where we've been, gotten some good information from Lamb Center, pulling from other folks to try to be able to demonstrate that, yes, we've made progress, certainly in terms of some of the projects that are on the table, but there is a need that we're trying to fill, and that need, there are a bunch of different flavors to that, whether it's in terms of what's coming to the Lamb Center, what's coming for other purposes, et cetera. And, you know, just as maybe a rabbit hole, but just to mention, I think this will be further informed by what we see as some of those federal dollars fall away in the coming weeks and months. And I know there's a larger effort to put to get some attention and focus on that. Certainly, I think we can participate in that actively, but some of that information, new information, right off the press, so to speak, information in the next, hopefully, unfortunately, 4 to 6 weeks will also be part of this to make it, you know, very real, and not only for the longer term, you know, investments that we're looking at, but also what can the county do in the short term to help fill, but to help slow down and mitigate some of that impact. So anyway. In addition, in terms of sort of the development of this, we will know on Tuesday what is in the county executive recommendation for 24, and that will obviously inform what our specific ask is in terms of the conversation with the board and with the budget guidance, because we'll know sort of the new, we'll have an idea of the new base that we're working for the future on, and then also, I guess, 2 weeks after that, we'll know what the available funds are at third quarter, and so we can start focusing that. So there are some, again, still holes to fill, but I think ones that we've anticipated, because that information will be coming in the normal timeframe. Anybody else, anything else? That's great.
So on that account, the Human Services Council will be posting the budget. Christina will be coming, and we are supposed to be hosting other boards, authorities, and commissions on the 27th. So if we had questions we wanted to claim for that, let's think of that. Great place to add a spotlight on the housing and to illuminate questions about that. Yeah, we'll find that. I don't know whether the state budget will have been determined. And that's another question in our mind, is what is it on our own executive proposal for the public.
any numbers they have though are pretty, by the time it gets spread across the Commonwealth, it's not much of an impact.
Well, I mean, there's so much conversation about the missteps on the school budget. That was a central topic during the conversation with Senator Peters. With the CBO that they're public. Those are the things that, I think we have to be aware of. Frame
And it pushes for next year. I mean, this is muscle memory as we go forward for next year here with the legislative, I think. Wait, 1, 2, in combination with the budget and the legislative, make it even more effective.
After some of these over funds with the legislation, about $4 billion. Committed, I think we've got a good short record. On Sickles, all of our budget guys. So they've been sorting it out and they have their different budget statements. But I mean, hey, that's where the money is.
Yeah, right.
I mean, you rather bank because that's where the money was.
Mary, one of the ideas I've been toying with, only other people pay for it. Not to ask for that number out of the funds, but to ask for a percentage for surplus. Right, because then it's like, if I just had 1% of any future surplus, and the answer is that's not a lot, right? It's a penny fund. But the fact is that would make a significant impact on, legal representation for evictions. So there's a way, if I'm a legislature and just ask me for a percentage in a future surplus, you're like, yeah, actually that makes sense. I can show benefit instead of asking for that million or a couple of million to do something that's harder to justify. And I think that might be something that we think about positioning ourselves with.
So is there an number we're shooting?
So,
We don't know what it is.
top of. Kind of where we had. Yeah, that's okay. It's kind of where we're at, but the reason it's highlighted is to your point, we don't know what's going to be in the budget on Tuesday. And so once we've got that, then we can refine it. And not only will we know what is in the budget for us, but we'll know the whole context. I would imagine there's going to be, for a number of years now, there's going to be some money for the board to look at priorities. And obviously part of that conversation is that's rate reduction. But everything else is in the mix as well. And so that'll help us sort of get to the balance where I think, we talked a lot about what do we think is achievable and what do we really need to ask for. And that needs to be informed by what the overall context is, and we'll know that on Tuesday.
So I've been talking to board members, and at least one of them is willing to go for 2 things. And I know NACP will push for 2, because we did last year, and the year before.
And again, that's the same conversation we've been having in terms of what it is we put out there. So it's up to the larger group to decide that, but I do think it's important before we make that decision, know what the larger context.
Founder testified in that, and then each of us brings our own story. It does help. I love the strategy where you have pushing on, those great start, and again shows the seriousness. Understand.
And Joe, every penny is about $30 million.
Yeah, we'll know that for sure as well, but ish, yeah, probably a little bit more this year, but yeah.
So this is great, and so we'll probably time-wise, our next meeting is March 24th. I know we've talked about the meetings with, having that lead up to the budget session. So some of that has been discussed and laid out here, and then obviously registering for the hearings.
I have a question. So, recognizing nobody has a crystal ball, given all the different priorities that the Board of Supervisors is looking at, what realistically are we thinking we might be successful in getting in terms of the housing needs? It may not be a fair question, but if you had a crystal ball, what do we think?
I don't know. I think that it is absolutely reasonable to expect that there will be more added to the base. Because I think that, the commitment has been reiterated that we're gonna get there. It's just a matter of how quickly. And certainly, I think we had this sort of strategic debate about, what the strength of the advocacy is at what level. I don't think we're gonna get to 2 cents, in
I don't think
24,
so.
but I think we will get some more. And I think that once we see just how much flexibility there is bottom line in the budget next Tuesday, that question could be more easily answered. But there are going to be some other factors. I think that probably residential homeowners are going to get hit pretty hard because I think the values are continuing to go up. So there's going to be some pressure on that rate. And there, right, it never makes sense to me, but there's always sort of the psychological, what is the impact on the average homeowner in terms of the change from this year to last year. And there are numbers that cause people to, and if that's $500 or if that's $700, that's going to, even make it more difficult to use that baseline flexibility for affordable housing rather than rate reduction. But at least next week we'll know how much some of those numbers are and start figuring out the answer to that question. But I don't.
No, thank you. That's a fair response. Thank you.
That's the best can talk about the effect of that benefits and inflation pressures and those who aren't homeowners, ones that will benefit from the housing investment. So there's obviously ways for advocates to kind of talk about that, realizing that is the reality.
If I could, I was just going to say that, I think another way to understand, where we are is that, we are on a path to 2, right? And, our goal in terms of that journey to 2 for this year is to achieve 1.5 through a combination of means, including baseline plus, mid-year review, add-ons. And I think that as we understand that, and as we help our board members understand that is a very sustainable story to tell, would be the way I would put it.
Part of the rationale behind sort of the numbers that we put together on the bottom of page 2 is making that point that absolutely the baseline funding is where we're going and what we need to attain. However, as we move there, we need to make sure that, and our third quarter advocacy will speak to this, and whatever amount is left, and the next memo comes out in the federal dollars, and as we get the carryover, we need to also be able to add to the baseline so that we get to that number. And I think that one of the things we talked about before about having a more informed conversation on that front, because we'll have sort of the cash flow. I keep saying the cash flow, it's really not cash flow, but what we think we're seeing the need for in the short term, and what if we were to be able to get $10 million that third quarter, what projects that would go for? Because we've got them in the pipeline. It's not as if we're making that number up. It's not as if we're just trying to get to the calculation of the 2 cents. It's because we've got projects that need that funding in order to be successful. I could just, before I forget.
You're saying, Joe. You're saying.
Before I forget again, I just make one more comment about the advocacy strategy. One other thing we'll know on Tuesday is the schedule of individual magisterial district budget meetings. And so we'll be adding that onto our timeline, which we distributed before, so that we can all can see when those will be. I think that they're all going to have a virtual option again, like they have during COVID, so that'll make it easier for folks wanting to advocate. But we'll have those schedules, and a lot of what we were hoping the budget committee talking point language we used for were those conversations. And so every board member at every one of their town halls, and I think this is importantly, all the rest of the people listening to those discussions, hears the need, informed by sort of where we've been and also where we're going.
I'd like to point out, I wish we'd be more ambitious. At some point, Gary and I have been advocating for budget stuff for many years. With an ACP, we've organized like 20 speakers in a lump, and we've done this year after year. The board committed to 1.5 cents 4 years ago. They had it, they passed it, but then they took it back. And different things have happened, and you know, it got way back to half of it last year. And then supplemented by federal funds. I mean, this isn't pie in the sky stuff. This was done 4 years ago.
Yes.
So I don't know if there's any other areas that have taken such a hit by the COVID and the bad times, but we did 1.5.
Yeah. And I think, I mean, I agree with you, but I think before, and I know we all have slightly different opinions about this, but absolutely the baseline is where we need to be. But from my perspective, if we've been able to fill in the short term, at least some of, most of that differential between what we've gotten the baseline and the 2 cents with federal dollars or other county dollars and quarterly reviews, and if we've been able, most importantly, to keep the projects that we've got in the pipeline moving, I think we should view that as a victory. It's not a complete victory, but it is a success. Maybe not, it's a success in terms of keeping the pressure on, which is absolutely necessary, and getting a result from that. And maybe I'm not thinking about this completely accurately, but I don't think we've been in a position where we've had to say we can't go forward with that project because we don't have the delta in place, or at least the promise of the delta, but they're going to be, cash in the bank. And that to me is important.
I can just confirm that we have and able to move forward multiple absolutely massive projects because of this approach. So Main Square West, Somos, Residences at the Government Center 2, all have been able to move forward because of this approach. And so, to Joe's point, I think that, put another way, the investment on the baseline will follow our continued success with this strategy. And, what we need to focus on is, this path to 2 cents, and how we're getting there and how we're getting it into the baseline. And one of the most important ways to do that is to continue to produce what they're giving us. So.
We're talking about a path to 2 cents at the end of the year. Things is that the one?
What I'm saying is, our end goal is 2. I think 1.5 is a way station on the way to 2. And whether it occurs in 24 or 25, what's important is that we get there.
I think maybe where you're going, Mary, is, and I think highlighted section B was sort of, again, not an incomplete statement based on what we didn't know yet. I think it does make sense to say, what this is saying is 1.5 cents in the annual budget.
Mm-hmm.
And so then the delta to get to 2 is, of the quarterly reviews, it should be clearer here though, that our objective is to get to the 60 million, say, for lack of, not knowing the exact number, by baseline and quarterly review.
24, 25?
Well, this is just talking about for 24, so that
Right.
we're meeting the 2 cents with those combined strategies.
Right.
Baseline funding, carry over third quarter, but if there was any additional federal.
60 million in funding without 60 million of places to put the funding just puts us back in time, because then we have to refight so that it all has to kind of coalesce, right?
And that, to me, and I know I keep saying this, but it's not really, but that's where the cash flow element, I think, is can have 200 million, you know, on the whiteboard. But if we're not gonna spend dollars in the fiscal year where they're available, they're just gonna accumulate. And that, I think, the worst place we wanna be.
I think this preservation thing's gonna cost a whole bunch more.
Yeah, You're right. Yeah.
And, you know, if you don't have that strike fund, if you don't have things ready to go, you can't say exactly what it's gonna be now, but that's gonna cost a ton of money. Everybody's asking for money
Yeah.
for that.
And to me, just looking
We're gonna
ahead,
spend this money.
and let's be really optimistic. Let's say in 25, we've got the 2 cents in the baseline. I think we then switch our strategy, and all of that quarterly review money then is for preservation. To then get to target.
Beyond.
We will certainly beyond, but then the target is specific to preservation too.
And if
For
we
the-
may, just to bus along, because I think, I think this is really important in understanding how we frame, having some talking points that AHAC is comfortable with and that the rest of us use in our own lobbying. But I point out number on page 1, under 1.4, because what is not included again, any of the services and the other pieces are with that. And there's not currently a strategy for how do we pay for and ensure that there's childcare available? It's, NCS is coming in, difference it, summers. In terms of a community center. So we've talked about it, but I know for Pathways and Cornerstones and other organizations, that piece of it, is not understood, particularly when we're building for 30%. And I know you
Last
have
paragraph,
that.
that last paragraph on page 4 is our attempt at that, but you're absolutely right. We need to at least have the expectation that need is going to be incorporated. Just broke. I mean, it's going to happen because we said we need it. And you're right, it's not there yet.
I point that out in terms of funding and understanding this and how it works with the house. A tremendous job, Joe, and I think we all know we're lucky to have someone who knows the context so well and to help us lay it out and then build on it.
The angel wings are over here. I can see them laughing.
I would say it's kind of cool being on this side of it.
You don't have to just give us
Yeah.
vague answers.
Somebody asked me where this was, but if I had any PTSD about being where I am at this point in the time, going to the budget on Tuesday. Absolutely not.
So helpful. Thank you,
That's
Joe.
funny.
Very helpful.
Maybe you have some anticipatory stress, maybe. I would. Just
And
a little
just
bit.
to get back to Tom's point, I'll echo the talking to Loudoun County advocates on their budget that was released. They asked for 10 million, I think it's like 6.5 in there, but they have so much money unspent that they're really trying to make the argument, why should you add more if you can't even use what you have? So I think that's very
Basic math.
$20 million, $25 million.
If I could just really briefly on that, I know we need to move on, but just very briefly, the extent to the speed with which we've all been able to work together to get the funds committed, within the fiscal year in which they're appropriated has been really, really important. I think for our board to have confidence that the resources are getting to the projects. That's number one. Second thing, as we move along doing, affordable housing development, it's going to get harder because a lot of the lower hanging fruit is being picked. And for as difficult as the ones we've already done are, right? They're going to get more challenging. They're going to be expensive over. And I think, the criticality of these resources coming in relative to land acquisition as well, so that we can create sites for our partners to develop is also going to be essential. So we do not plan on having the loud issue.
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah.
Thanks, Jim.
That's a place, yeah.
The overlay on
Can give
this
it
is
to us.
that we absolutely have to have the APEC position designed and communicated up the food chain. There's also the public education process that we also are committing to doing. There's also a more progressive point that we always want to have out there arguing for the real need to be met. At the time that's possible. We'll be at the end of high school funding. More people than I've seen than ever before. Very interesting. How do we support the people who we've just posted in our faith communities? How do we, that's where some of the messaging has to be realistic, but as well as us. I think it's important for us to be not stifling aspirational with a how the system can bear just this much of pushing.
So we need some advocates further out than this group.
And we will have, but I think our work at AHAB should be one very important informing thing to do for people who want to be way out, because we often need to pull them in to understand the complexities of what does a deal actually require, rather than some airy-fairy, but no money in it happen. I just would urge us to be thinking about it, because I think even not every member on AHAC is responsible for this moment, so we have to find a passion.
My advocacy theory is you always ask for a little more than you think you're gonna get in the end. You don't ask for the middle, you ask for more and kind of expecting it to come back a little bit. But
Wonderful strategy to have that spectrum that we're still all saying the same thing, Mary. And I think that's important, but we've learned a lot from the work that Tom Burnett has done with the board. And we know also that people need to understand, for example, for folks in hypothermia, that many have had opportunities to be housed and aren't ready to accept or what the choices are. And so so we want to be careful not to just say it's a matter of it ain't there and, nobody's, but also the right housing option for individual choice at the price that's appropriate. And that's what we're doing here. And I think I can't say enough about how important that is not to get lost in it's all or nothing. Jerry, you have the floor because you've done some great work on legislation.
I'm just going to try to catch up with time for us too for this meeting. Yeah, so we did have a meeting of the Legislative Policy Committee. It was very much near-term future oriented because we believe that we were not prepared to try to step into the legislature this year. There are other routes for some of us to do that. But if we're going to be better in the coming year, establishing a stronger housing flank for the county's legislative package that will be approved in December, we really got to think in the phase of learning as much as we can about what was achieved and what was not achieved in this legislative session. One of the most important things that we thought could come close to being achieved have to be on our radar screen, because I think we want to concentrate ourselves as a legislative policy committee. One significant recommendation, and if we could achieve that in the year, we really want to seize upon that as soon as possible. As soon as possible, though, actually is all of the analysis of what happened in the 2023 session, but also debriefing with Linda Hoffman, who supports the housing side of it in the legislative session. Chris Ziegler. I mean, I'm just feeling such a sense of awe and gratitude for the work that goes into tracking everything that has an impact on our county. And the power that is had by the county, because we are pretty influential with our own group of legislators who have such an enormous weight on the legislative group. And said that June is the time when calls will go out for those authorities and commissions to be suggestive of what could begin to frame the package, which means between the end of session and June, our committee will be trying to figure out how do we appropriately tell what happened, but also how do we begin to come up with a framework that we could bring back here as an executive committee, what we could possibly be asking for. The June time comes around for us to go into Claudia and 13 things that we think about.
A question, Jerry. We made a proposal for legislation last year from AHAC. Did that get into a bill? What happened to that?
It didn't get into a specific bill because I am still uncertain how would Claudia and her team feed into the bill generated.
Well, we didn't really go anywhere because there wasn't the
Well, let me
legislation.
say, and I think, let's first say that the legislative committee did absolutely include recommendations that AHAC made, so that was one. We did have influence on the package of from the county to the state, and pieces of that, there's not one bill, as you know, pieces of that certainly were consistently advocated for, but again, it's just, you know,
Because I never heard back about what bills were incorporated in, so we pushed for them or testified for
well,
them.
that was one of the, like, the wrap-up piece that yeah.
So you're right, Mary. We have applying for supporting affordable housing package. It was somewhat iterative of previous years and not pointedly saying we have X amount of money for eviction prevention, X amount of policy to.
So if we start earlier next time,
We
maybe we
start
can
earlier.
actually talk to some of the representatives and things like that. Get them to sponsor bills.
Well,
Is that what we can do or no?
well, to be clear, AHAC would make recommendations to the board. The board that would.
So not as AHAC, but as the chamber, I reached out to all of the delegates and state senators and asked them what they had included for housing, which is the big issue for workforce and the chamber. And Delegate Shin is the only one that had things. But everybody else said, hey, I'd be open to ideas. And so I think those are opportunities, but I'm with you, Tom. Our job is only to give that advocacy to the board, but there's opportunities for us, but we need to know at least what is the ask, what are the things we can do, and individually we can make suggestions because they're wide open to including those things. They're certainly, we know they're advocates for this issue, but they don't know what to like. And when you look at the entirety, you can go down and look at the LAS and see all the bills that are out there and what's there. I think it's a real goal overall. I mean, it really is. Other than the governor's plan that has a couple of points, you see what they're putting in. There's things they're doing, doesn't even come close. And it's all because of we need to come together. There are a couple of groups that actually meet and talk about it. So I think there's parts there, but we need to figure out how to help. And that's more individual. We can do as much as we can. Otherwise, we clearly overstep our bounds as they have.
I see it as an inside and an out influence. So we're inside as an AHAC group and wanting to work better and with the development of a legislative package. If we can become more specific in our recommendations and ways that all of us say, boy, this is a really big pointer we'd like you to embrace, maybe it makes it into the package.
Does the county do that? Do they actually go to the legislators and say, here's, we'd like a bill that does this?
Yes, they do. Can I just make a point briefly in terms of timing? As a BAC, Joe, correct me if I'm wrong here, but my recollection of the timeline to put in legislative recommendations or proposals for BACs is usually around August 1st. So we have a we have a perfect setup for AHAC to make, to develop a set of recommendations. There's a prescribed form and everything for it, which we can help with. But there's a specific timeline, a specific process now for you to do it.
So our year now is really learning that process as deeply as we can build structure within cities. So we will iteratively be mastering the time schedule and approach, but also build relationships with those who move that process forward.
Because at that point, because I really like the inside outside concept, it seems to me that at the right point, and it's probably late September, given sort of the calendar, I think that having a delegation of us specifically talk to at least three. It would seem to me the chairman, Walkinshaw, the chair of legislative, and Dahlia, supervisor Patrick as chair of HHS, having us one-on-one conversations or five-on-one, whatever, conversations about how they can best, what they need from us and how they can best do that is sort of the sweet spot for that.
I have a question. Oh, you have a question too. I just had a question, and it's helpful what you just said, Tom, because I was wondering there has to be a process and what are the steps? And I guess part of that is like who on the board advocates to get somebody to own because you have to have somebody in Richmond who says, I'm gonna take this bill on, I'm gonna push it forward. So is that through the board of supervisors?
So just very briefly, the way the process works is that both the agencies and the BACs submit legislative proposals to legislative services, called the Articles Group.
Mhm.
They evaluate them, go through them. I think they have a discussion with the chair of the legislative committee. And then at the end of that process, when our legislative staff puts together the board's kind of initial legislative package, there are usually included in there, one or more pieces of legislation to initiate. If the board is supportive of those, the legislative committee is supportive of those, then legislative staff will go and basically shop for sponsors.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you. That's helpful.
If you tune in to one of the board legislative committee meetings that we want to afternoon, starting at 4, you'll see that even that is not wholly the challenge for Claudia and her team, because there are members of the delegation from Northern Virginia who put an own bill in which may have ramifications backwards into the system. And there's a need for county staff to do meetings with those members to clarify their understanding of it.
Well, that's what I was wondering how we get.
Yeah, just very briefly, just as a, kind of check in with Virginia Housing Alliance and and I don't know if I completely agree with this, but one of the points that was made is there was so much housing activity and so much pieces of legislation that touched on housing that it almost worked against us this year because nobody could track all of it, right? And there was difficulty finding alignment and alliances with other groups. And if we can, I guess, work with the state, providers on agreeing on like the top 3, policies, and we see it with EPLC and with the interfaith, what is it, BIC and Virginia Housing Alliance, and and then they're negotiating with a million other state groups, but and also I think to Rick Sullivan's point that I've heard him say many times is like, ideas coming out of Fairfax aren't always welcome by the rest of the state, and being mindful of that as well. So just all things to consider, and I think, agree with respecting AHAC's, position here with the county process. But just being mindful of all of those other things that might be working against us.
On that point, again, I would say if we're gonna strengthen ourselves in the inside processes of moving through Fairfax County's, boards and up to the board, we also have to be aware of the outside strategy. So hearing your comment about interest in housing, maybe if we had better partnership between, groups that could be influential, knowing that the Affordable Housing Advisory Council pushing this, there might be better strengthening of the opinion, not just Northern Virginia, but something that broadly supported by groups that would otherwise be seen as positive fellows.
Yesterday, for example, was the Northern Virginia group at Chambers Day in Richmond, Chamber Day. So, we sit on the public policy committees of all the local chambers and influence their agenda going forward. So to that point, the information that we gather, your timeline, June to August, based on everything we learn to have an impact on the county's agenda, then all of us from an educational standpoint, we're learning about that and include it in our work, make sure it goes forward, and relying on groups like Baja, chambers and others to. But again, Jerry, you really thank you for leading this and positioning us in a good place. There will be, Jerry, maybe we'll get a debrief.
Yeah.
Session.
Yeah, no, that's one of the,
Very, one quick point that I think is really the Governor's Housing Conference this year. Every other jurisdiction in the state started pontificating about how, important affordable housing, and it seems like the rest of the state is, I don't know, 6, 8, 10 years behind where we are here in Northern Virginia. And so we're just starting to see a real cry in Richmond and Chesterfield and Rico that there is no more affordable housing. All these people are moving out of Northern Virginia and they're pushing up our housing prices, right? So there could be some real opportunities to start building these alliances because it's as Jill was saying, when your big rich uncle comes down and has all these ideas, nobody wants to hear it. But now if you start creating, us, Tidewater, Richmond, whatever, you might start to get some real traction because without those, I don't think there's a lot of there in the state.
thank you.
And thank you again, Mary. Fair housing.
These are really short topics, so I won't take that. This is the most complicated thing I've ever done. We have a fair housing committee, we met once, we have other meetings scheduled. It's formed, it's very nice. We have certain members who volunteered for MAHAC and brought in a few expert people and then disability and we have different things. So we had a good group. We had one meeting. The thing that's under review is out from COG. You really can do it all by just looking at the Fairfax County report. That includes the metro goals, the 7 metro goals for fair housing. And the things that Fairfax County has contributed. And that is actually only 7 pages of the 250-page report. So we're gonna try to get people to focus on that. That's the thing they actually want comments on. They don't want comments on all the GIS data they put out there. So we're gonna try to do that. We did 3 things at the meeting, just 3 things. One was that people made comments on the goals. They were a little disappointed that Fairfax County only had 2 action items in its plan. The point was that there would be metro goals that all the jurisdictions agreed on, 7 of those. And then each jurisdiction was supposed to submit a set of actions that fell under those goals. So if you're given this goal, what are you going to do about it? And a lot of the jurisdictions gave a lot of goals. Fairfax gave, not goals, but gave actions. Fairfax County only did 2 actions. So we need a little more work in that regard. None of the jurisdictions really did a real bang up job on their actions, but you know, some put a lot more effort into it than others. Some did a little timeline and, you know, did that kind of thing. So I think we're gonna definitely want to get more actions. The context this thing is in is also out on review right now from the federal government, some new regulations on affirmatively furthering care housing, and that's called AFFH. And these were sort of generally known to the people who did the COG report because they're based on similar regulations that are out during Obama in 2015. No, earlier. Anyway, they were out there for a little while, and then Trump came in and he cut them off. He got rid of them. And then the Biden administration started reviewing them to revive them. And they made some changes. And now they've put those up for review. So at the same time, the framework is out for review and the specific thing is out for review. The COG and Fairfax will fit into this larger framework. It's also being reviewed. And what needs to come out of the COG and Fairfax thing at the end is prescribed by the larger framework. And what they're going to want from the jurisdiction is what they now call an equity plan. It used to be a impediments with AI. We've been doing this for years and years. And we have to keep doing it, but it's got a new name and a new format. And we'll find out more about that as that develops. But this COG thing is something that's on the way for us to create our equity plan. So try to get people to understand what that all is. The other thing we discussed was we didn't see, you know, so why do we only have 2 action items? That's kind of embarrassing. And we sort of talked about, well, who's driving this thing? Who's running the show here on this, supposed to be getting this through? And we kind of realized that really, you know, there were the COG goals fall into, if you're going to take new action items on them, they fall into about 4 different departments, like in the county. There's the housing, there's this human rights, there's the planning and development, there's the transportation. And all of those are in separate silos and they all go directly up to the county executive. So officially the guy in charge is the ORAP, the human rights outfit. But we don't clear how everything coordinates together with that. So Tom is going to be setting up a meeting with Ken from ORAP, Carla Bruce, and we're going to see what it is now and maybe, you know, tweaks or whatever, because somebody has to kind of drive this and ride herd over it. Do it, not just report on it, but kind of intentionally. It's supposed to be intentional. We're supposed to do this intentionally. And so that's an issue. And then the other thing is we want to try to get other people to comment on it. And asking the general public to comment on a 250-page plan, not probably going to work. Although there is things out, the county put out some information on it on the website, but my experience, this is not going to work. So we're trying to get some lists together. I've asked, OREP's already sent it out, and I've asked for their lists. I'm asking Neighborhood and Community Services and Carla, and if you know any other offices who are looking for, you know, people who have some relation to this issue, disability groups, all kinds of racial, ethnic groups in the county. You know, we want to find out made a whole list of different kind of groups that might be interested. So I'll write them a letter and I'll give it to you guys to approve, but it's going to say this is really important. You really only, these are the 7 pages that are crucial that we want comments on. These are the recommendations. And given the link to the COG page. Now, everything that goes to the COG comes back to Fairfax County. We send it back to the jurisdiction. It's easier if it all goes through that link. So that's what we intend to try to get that organized out to those organizations next week. They have until March 31st.
Lauren, could I just, let me frame, because, and thank you for getting this going. I'm really sorry I missed the first meeting, and I will be joining you. It feels like to me, because it is a broader region-wide thing and response for AHAC, one, because I hear you saying a couple things. One, for AHEC, it is about sort of affirming, it seems like our position, I'm thinking about the budget. Should AHEC affirm, with Fairfax County, the Board of Supervisors, this is a priority, it's important, it's rooted in our commitment, et cetera. And two, here are things that have been recommended regionally and in Fairfax County, some opportunity to advance these actions that will be in consonance with that goal of their housing. And then I think it would be helpful, if we know what has fallen out of that, maybe Navajo and others have done the work, what has fallen out in terms of state enabling legislation, again, just feeding back into, there's some things that we talk about that we're limited. That's always been the issue that could feed into what Jerry is we're just thinking.
They were aware of
But it
that.
feels like we should scale it. I'm really more asking the question, should this be scaled for AHAC to be perfect? And just very, how can we ensure our board is committed to it? And just, a strong statement supporting them.
So this goes before our board. It goes through the public review, it goes back to the COG people, they revise it, then it comes out again, and then it has to be approved by each jurisdiction. And in Fairfax, that's going to be the Board of Supervisors. You're going to have some kind of motion, some kind of thing you approve. So that's when AHAC will recommend to the board.
That's what I'm saying. I think our limit, and I didn't even. I feel like, I guess I feel like AHAC's role should be focused with our board. And these are the things that we think you consider similar to the legislative. Or else I'm not sure about us running public comments or trying to, that would be my worry. How do we get that input, which you've done a good job of setting the table to ensure we have a wide audience? That's my only, and I.
No, that's fine, because it was along those lines. I mean, what I wanted to say, great job on the video, the COG video. I see on that one.
Great.
Yeah, but I that was where I was going. It's like, it sounds like it's a big lift and there's like a lot of things going on, but the COG is, spread across the DMV and all of that. So what specifically is the ask, like in terms of AHAC, what can AHAC do to move things forward without taking on more than it can chew and being impactful? It's along the lines of what Kelly was saying.
Well, one thing we could do to distribute is to just give it to all of our AHAC members and say, here's this, if you want to distribute it to your organizations and get some comment, or to other organizations, but maybe with a letter that's a little bit more specific to Fairfax County and directing them to the Fairfax County version.
That would
Because
be our final
when you-
document to the board saying, here's our recommendation.
that would be another thing. And the first thing would be to ask the AHAC members to distribute to their own organizations and send in comments. So here's the thing, before you have to read it, maybe send it out to your organizations. And see, when you go onto the document, when you click onto the AHAC, the COG website, there's about a dozen different things you can click on for comment. And I'm thinking for Fairfax County, we could, try at least with a cover letter and narrow that down and say, this is the one to click on.
Hearing the conversation, maybe that's another flavor of what we're talking about. I think, fast approaching the deadline. Would one action that we could take be an AHAC recommendation? I think the question mark in my mind is exactly soon, but an AHAC recommendation that as part of the next month process, can we make sure that these groups are included? And maybe that's, jointly to, first under knowledge here as sort of the deputy county executives, and I guess maybe Rachel as well, overseeing the 4 agencies that you talked about, because I think that's part of the challenge in that there's some dispersion of responsibility, but your group's look has identified the fact that maybe there's a gap in the seeking of input we suggest that, or recommend, or whatever the right word is, staff do that.
I think that's 100% appropriate. AHAC's advisory role. I think that makes a lot of sense. I would also say with respect to the actual content is that, my understanding is that the goals that, were included specifically for Fairfax County were intended to be additive to both the regional and our previous goals. And I think that we, one thing that then this is sort of to Mary's specific point, and I think it's going to be, kind of discussion that we have with Ken and Carla, is to maybe communicate a little bit more clearly about that too. But I don't see that as an AHAC issue. I see that as like a county issue.
We can
So,
certainly point it out in a way to say, if that's clear, that it's not just two actions, the context
that
is.
is in this
Well,
broader
we want
context.
Because we can listen.
So,
No, but if it's meant to build on the previous, is there a way to lay that out?
Yeah, I think you have to comment on what you got there. The other one said maybe they didn't do the right format or something. I don't know, but it's out there and all the other jurisdictions did it. Put in their actions.
When is your next meeting?
And then the 20 next week.
February 22nd at 3 to 4.
Income, that they should.
So a couple things on that is I think you're right that they should. We could certainly transmit it to Candace Bennett, who's their housing committee chair. And Paul Michalski icon is the chair of the C. In a manner kind of similar to what we're doing with DCEs. I think that does make a lot of sense. I would be also curious, just sort of taking a step back, as to the role of the Human Rights Commission on this, because for those of you that may not know that Department of Housing and Community Development is a partner in this, but we are not the Fair Housing Planning and Enforcement Agency, OREF is. And so and OREF has administrative authority over the Human Rights Commission as well. So one would also imagine that a great deal of responsibility in this respect sits with them as well.
So not quite clear on what y'all are saying for AHAC. We should try to communicate internally to different parts of the county that they should comment on the plan. Is that what you're saying?
Deputy county executives, under their leadership, or portions of the audience should be aware and involved in this. But in addition, there may be more prominent organizations like the Planning Commission who specifically alerted to it.
And I think, again, it's very appropriate in AHAC's advisory role to provide that advice to the PCAs and to the PC.
Very good. AHAC is
And then
important and
you think we can't okay to send it out to all AHAC members and say, you might want to distribute this to your organizations. But you don't.
Because we post that and sort of that's that wink,
Right.
wink, inside, outside.
Right.
Take it and use it, cornerstones, take it and use it.
We can make a little letter and say, focus on the comment by the state. This is what- Okay, and that, but you don't think we should send it out to lists that the county provides for related organizations? Or should we ask somebody else to do that or?
Yeah, that's the county's role.
And we are affirming that very strongly that could inform the.
Board has already specifically directed the Office of Public Affairs to do this.
Well, no, the public affairs put it on the website and they put out some public comment, but now I'm talking about sending it to particular organizations. For informed comment. Did you do that?
We can get it, but with that, the communication to the deputy county executive that transmits sort of the AIC reputation includes the list that you generated that makes sense for them to contact and include for comment that your review has identified these as significant entities, and whether they've been approached before, we don't know, but they should be.
So we send the list to who?
It seems to me, Rachel Flynn, Alicia Steer McCormick, and Chris Leonard as the 3 deputy county executives who oversee the agencies that we talked
No, I got that part, but I'm talking about lists like of disability groups.
We'll send them that list and say,
They're not part of the county. They're-
right, but each of them have staff with relationships with them.
So, the Brilliant Virginia always helps me get my head around how we might want to frame this so that when we come into your meeting next week, maybe we could even have a start of sort of what's the piece of what's being recommended, and then the what, which is, what are those issues that we think are particularly important here in Fairfax County that we
Yeah, if comments are due on the end of
Yeah,
March,
because
it has to
from a
come out.
timing.
Yeah.
So we could even take that action. I think, could I have a sense of this executive committee, just the action to communicate the importance of this to the town executive staff, this in confirming that they're getting this input. And then AHAC can follow up with our specific, very specific.
Okay, well, let's talk
So I think there's.
we'll do this.
timing around that would work. And Mary, it's true, I saw the video as well, and followed you. This is a daunting issue, and thank you for your incredible advocacy. Tom.
I believe Malia has a copy of the presentation that I gave to the Board of Supervisors Housing Committee on Tuesday. And if you can go to slide 10, it's specifically about subject. Perhaps I'll just start, and there's only a few slides, so it's not very complex. As discussed at previous meetings, the idea was to come back to the Board of Supervisors as they directed to reconstitute the Homelessness Governing Board and Continuum of Care Board. It's gone through different evolutions, iterations over the years. You probably remember during the 10-year plan to end homelessness, the governing board had a very diverse mix of elected leaders and business representatives, affordable housing developers. With the merger of the Office to Prevent Net Homelessness, the end of the 10-year plan, the former governing board dissolved itself. And then we, as a trial, essentially created a committee of this Affordable Housing Advisory Council, with the clear, explicit direction from the board that we would re-examine this and reevaluate it and come back to them with new recommendations on whether to continue that or try something different. Thank you. That's great. Perfect timing. So on Tuesday, as I mentioned, presented to the Board of Supervisors the slide deck, including the home ARP allocation plan, which was the first section, which I shared at the last all AHAC membership meeting. If you can go to the next slide, it's a very simple diagram just showing that the Continuum of Care Board is going to be directly under the Board of Supervisors, and as you'll see in a second, have appointees from the board to create this very clear communication and accountability and with the Board of Supervisors. And that was generally warmly received by the board. I think The past few years have been very tumultuous around homeless services, and there's a lot of new leaders and new advocates and community members interested in the issues, and so that they want to have this clear connection to homeless services. You can go to the next slide. So much of the charter that's being drafted and recommended to the Board of Supervisors is the same that's currently there. The primary purpose is to engage the community. Members provide community leadership around homeless services, policy guidance around preventing and ending homelessness, and grounded in Fairfax County's policies like One Fairfax, aligning with the county-wide strategic plan. Members would have 2-year terms, meeting at least every quarter, supported by staff from HCD in the Office to Prevent and End Homelessness. The primary duties, next slide, are about developing, monitoring, and update our continuum of care strategic plan, viewing and monitoring our system-wide performance around preventing and ending homelessness, and then much around communicating with and educating the public and engaging them in these strategies. It's something that's widely talked about across the entire country. The communities that really transform their homeless systems and reduce homelessness significantly requires cross-sector partnership, not just nonprofits and government and the private sector, businesses, but even across those, it requires things like fair housing and human rights and transportation and employment and housing, obviously, to really address these complex issues, mental health, domestic violence. We think it's very important that the board hears, at least on an annual basis, our progress towards these goals of preventing and ending homelessness. And so that's included in these duties. Next slide, please. Within the federal continuum of care program, there are some very specific responsibilities of a continuum of care that every community must fulfill in order to receive continuum of care funding. We receive just over $10 million a year, and we're regularly getting the opportunity to apply for bonus funding to increase that amount. And this is a list of those responsibilities, and the Continuum of Care Board their role is primarily to act on behalf of the local continuum of care, which I always equate with our community partnership. So I'll often use those words interchangeably. So not only do we have to hold regular meetings of our continuum of care membership, but we have to have various work groups and committees working on specific issues. And we have to update our charter annually, setting specific targeted goals and outcomes with the use of federal funding, not just the continuum of care funding, but the emergency solutions grant funding, having standards about how those funds are assigned to different programs, et cetera. I think you can kind of see it's a long list, and this is really a very short summary of what's in the Code of Federal Regulations tied to these funds. So these are the different duties that the Continuum of Care Board would have. Next slide. The membership is the most significant change, and it's primarily the appointees from the Board of Supervisors. We're setting some minimum and maximum number of members for the Continuum of Care Board. 15 is a pretty robust group, but still manageable, and 25 is pretty large. We would have the 10 appointees from the board. We want to also have appointees from the 2 cities of Fairfax and Falls Church, the mayors of both. This is similar to the last governing board, where they also appointed representatives. We have formal agreements with both of these cities for the use of not just the emergency solutions grant, but the CDBG and home dollars. So they're really important partners in this work and this formal relationships. But we also want to make sure that there are providers of housing and services as part of this board. That is different from the previous governing board under the 10-year plan, where it was primarily really service providers were the only ones that were not at the table.
Thank you.
Yeah, so in the retrospective that we had at that's right. And who better but those that are on the front line to kind of explain as to what's working and not working. But in that same vein, we want to make sure there are people that have actually experienced homelessness there at the table. You know, nothing about us without us, as a core philosophy. We set a minimum of 2 representatives based on feedback from our existing continuum of care committee, but really we should maximize this as much as possible. And also make sure that the membership reflects the diversity of the homeless population. Not just in terms of race and ethnicity, but also geography, their different special needs. And so there's really a lot to do to try to have a balanced membership that reflects our community. Next slide, please.
From you have at the bottom of that, I put it at the top of the list. Right, so it's still going to get you 2 minimum, but think differently about how that might look and how to make that reemphasize kind of short.
Good. Thank you, John.
On that account, there's also a lot of studies and practice that occurs around the country, and people with experience have no free time to do this work and donate their 2 loaded days. So you have to have a budget for really paying people to add their important lived experience at the table. Otherwise, I think it becomes more aspirational.
Often of that practice.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Grow up in Kings County and
Here in
Washington.
Fairfax, we do that in every place where there are communities involved.
It's an equity consideration. That's what it is.
We're all compensated as our time as staff
Exactly.
showing up to
Yeah.
these meetings. So, but towards that end, HCD actually created 2 paid part-time positions so that anyone with experience of homelessness who's going to be participating in these types of boards or committees will actually be compensated for their time. And so there are time-limited positions so they can be quickly hired to fill specific roles. So that was a really important step to that point. In terms of next steps, we generally got good board endorsement on Tuesday. So the idea is we would request board direction formally with an action item at an upcoming board meeting, and then move to the recruitment phase, working with the board members to identify their appointees, filling in the gaps in terms of housing and service providers and people with experience of homelessness. And then as directed by the board back in November at the last housing committee, they expect that this reconstituted board will conduct community engagement, identifying gaps and setting priorities for future fiscal year budget recommendations.
Which goes to the question we have drawn from the homeless here. Our engagement board. I just cut to the chase to say, I want to make it clear to everybody here, this is going to pass. Our charter originally as AHAC was done, I want to say very explicitly that all the federal requirements for the COC were being met with the COC committee. This is really just importantly and quickly about the board re-engaging issues, and so that it's just a shift back, but it wasn't that AHAC and COC that had been certainly the staff weren't meeting all the requirements. I think that's really important because I've heard some of, we're taking this back. So as AHAC saying, yes, we'll have to revise our charter, and I think we should make those still. Don't want to lose the intersection piece, and I think that I would like to recommend that one of the 6 minimums be, maybe someone from AHAC and someone to talk about, so that there is still that formal connection back and forth, even though many of us will be involved. And I just really want to commend, I think, the work that's gone forward to, seeing the interest. ITs come all the time, but the fact that there weren't people who were close to the ground, and frankly, at those tables, there were people sometimes, the supervisors sitting at the governing board, and without, like Eleanor, who can eloquently, when somebody says something or has an impression of things, Eleanor would very gently correct the record and sort of give the real, what's really happening. And there wasn't always staff or sometimes in a position where they couldn't really say, no, Supervisor Blowhole, you're wrong. You don't understand that. It's not that that would ever happen. I still think that this is you know, as an executive, if we could, you know, agree. Saying that. For this community, a chance to engage the people.
Thank you. That was so well said. Thank
Yes,
you.
I wish I
And thank
introduced
you,
it that
yeah,
way.
and thank you, Tom, for your staff support and the people who've actually carried this on while we're figuring all of it out. So Maura from Cornerstone's Law and from Pathway Homes and all the other people who came together and put something in place, you know, as a transitionary kind of process.
There's
But this
been
is
work to
exciting.
do for the COC committee to make sure that we continue to draw down these important federal dollars. And so I am very, very grateful for the current members.
It's our belief that 100% support the people who are specialized by granting to the county. Because I think that begs the question about,
I hope
you know, our
not.
budget committee or policy committee. What is the intersection that we cultivate in order to ensure that we are has to happen? My own limited knowledge of continuum of care, it doesn't do 100.
Certainly doesn't.
That you to have done.
Part of the presentation last November was the total government, federal, state, and local financial commitments in a typical fiscal year, and that was about $32 million, only 10 million of which came from the federal government. And as any of the nonprofit contractors and grantees of the county can say, these contracts don't pay for the full services. They're leveraging these government dollars with private dollars.
Clarify, will there be a budget committee? Will there be within this new framework will parallel what we are continuing?
I think it's up to the Continuum of Care board to determine the best structure for that. But as we keep saying, the only thing that ends homelessness is housing. And so obviously there's a very clear connection to this committee or council still. Yeah.
Board matter last summer, I think, was up with a new plan to end homelessness. How does this, is this the group that's gonna do that, or
Certainly.
how does that fit into this? Is that their first order of business?
Well, I think the first order is to identify those gaps by engaging people who are experiencing homelessness and providers and others and making budget recommendations, but that will then feed into priorities and strategies moving forward. I've heard multiple board members say that 10-year plan was another board's plan and really what is the strategies, what are the strategies that this current board or future board in 2024 will have. And it is a very politically sensitive issue. You just watch what's happened this week with McPherson Square in DC. And it only takes one case like that to really challenge a community to figure out how do you respond. It's very difficult.
So we'll come up with a longer term plan. Whatever.
Many communities have shied away from 10-year plans after the initial round in the early 2000s because you need to have a continuously updated and measurable plan every 3 years or something like that.
But the strategies that were used certainly produced some significant impact, and now we build on that. Thank you so much, Tom and Nicole. We're going to make sure that Supervisor Blowhole considers you for an appointment to one of these committees. You're such a trooper for joining us from your home this morning.
Sounds good, sounds good.
Sorry.
I love it.
Or maybe not. But the next thing, just again, very, very smartly, strategically, your agenda is there for the next meetings, and these dates coincide perfectly with action by AHAC to support some of these in terms of what we want to take forward so that we have time to bring things before AHAC. And then we are proposing a monthly executive committee meeting, and Regina is going to date for that, just again to keep things moving. We may, over the summer, poll you about virtual if we just want to do some more quick updates, but some important work, Jerry.
Yeah, I just wanted to raise the point, it is the budget season in Thomas. And Tom, the complexity of the budget, there's always one that's hard to beyond people at this table. So it seems to me it would be very late for me to bring that information to the Services Council who will prepare a presentation and an ask that would probably be getting finalized by the time we would have a March 24th meeting about the budget and our recommendations. So anything that could be done to accelerate a PowerPoint as has been done in the past. Going into all federal funding streams, but then also the counties.
So yeah, I think we can do something in that regard to provide a summary. I would caution that it really also requires somebody to truly explain it to you, so which I'm, certainly willing to do. I think, I do believe that in terms of budget advocacy, the primary mover and shaker from a BAC standpoint will be AHAC, of course. I'll just also note for March 24th that it might be helpful, for us to go ahead and provide a full-on presentation about our budget. So I will note that our wonderful SEMA has retired, and to go and smell the roses by becoming the controller of the FCPS. Some
Okay,
people buy
whatever.
timeshares. But it will probably be Amy and Jen.
And if I could also make the recommendation, we need to think of further presentation. That might also be a much easier challenge for the rest of us to say, get it to the right people with the right coaching to say, please understand this coaching. But I don't think there's going to be, if she came to the Human Services Council, I don't think there would be very serious questions. So it's the presentation really is most crucial and most important. I'd much rather just get a multiplier from the video and to call her into the meeting. In fact, if I was going to go to the Hunter Mineral District budget meeting, well, that's the kind of thing that I bring up in public and elevate in public. Why we awful county resources. Yeah, so I just would urge us once again to try to be kind to staff, but also be capable of amplifying that knowledge.
There may be two recordings. You may need one to amplify and the other one to educate. That may be two different recordings.
Nabaha is going to be convening, our leadership council around budget advocacy as a region, but also kind of doing more for, just grassroots advocates, just kind of informing them about the different budget process, getting together talking points, looking at calendars, all the things across the board. So won't be diving down deep into any particular, but just giving ideas. So we'll get that. Understand.
Thank you so much. And I think everybody saw the news that Michelle Crocker stepped into the interim role.
Yeah.
And she's still helping me though, so.
Nobody retires anymore.
Don't get tired anymore.
Hella out of here.
Easy.
I know. Good for you. Good for you. I'll support that. Yeah, good for you.
Thanks,
Thank you,
everybody.
guys.
Thank you. Thank
Good
you,
to see
thank you. Yeah, well, good luck with hiring.
Yeah.
Watch space.
We have some good people.
Thank you, bye-bye.
Yeah.
We'll find somebody for sure that can do the work primarily to support the DOC membership and make sure we keep bringing that money in, you know?
I get it.